The fire begins in the kitchen. Bright studio lights buzzed above like a swarm of bees as the audience took their seats. It was a special international cooking show broadcast live across the world. Celebrities, chefs, and culinary experts were invited to celebrate food, culture, and the spirit of kindness through cooking. The crowd was buzzing with energy, not because of the food, but because one name had shown up unexpectedly on the guest list. KeanuReeves. No one really knew why he was there. He wasn't a chef, he wasn't a critic, he wasn't even promoting a film. But when Keanu walked onto the stage wearing a simple black shirt and jeans, the audience stood and clapped, not just out of excitement, but out of deep respect. He gave a soft nod, his expression calm and kind, and took his seat at the side of the judging panel. He didn't speak much. He didn't need to. His presence spoke for itself. On the other side of the kitchen stage stood Chef Bruno Laurent. Bruno was loud, proud, and arrogant. He had won 3 Michelin stars in France and wore them like a crown. He walked like he owned the room, clanging pots and pans louder than needed, barking at assistants like they were beneath him. He believed cooking was a battlefield and he was the general. Today, Bruno shouted into his microphone, "I will show you how true food should taste, not the childish, bland food from, let's say, Spain." There was an awkward silence. The Spanish flag was on display next to the other international flags. Several audience members shifted uncomfortably. Some were Spanish. Others had deep love for Spanish culture. But Bruno didn't care. He laughed. "Yes, yes," he continued, slicing a tomato with flair. "Let us not pretend that tossing olives and shrimp in a pan is art. Real art takes skill, precision, not village recipes passed down by barefoot grandmothers." The audience gasped. The camera quickly cut to Keanu's face. His eyes had narrowed just slightly, but he stayed silent. A flicker of something deeper had stirred inside him. That no one knew this about Keanu, not the producers, not the hosts, not even his closest fans. But years ago, when Keanu was struggling as a young actor and had almost nothing in his pockets, it was a Spanish family in Los Angeles who had taken him in. They owned a tiny tapas restaurant. The grandmother, named Isabel, taught him how to make tortilla española and sang old Spanish lullabies while cooking. They fed him, gave him a room, treated him like a son, and never once asked for anything in return. He had never forgotten that kindness. As Bruno continued his arrogant performance, a young Spanish chef named Clara stood quietly at the other kitchen counter. She was from Valencia, small in stature, with her hair tied back in a neat braid. Her hands shook slightly as she prepared her grandmother's cherished paella. The moment Bruno had mocked Spain, her confidence had crumbled. Bruno smirked across the counter. "Come on, Clara," he said, not even bothering to lower his voice. "You're representing a whole country. Don't embarrass yourself." Clara didn't respond. She couldn't. Her eyes filled with tears. The rice in the pan began to stick, and her timing was off. The pressure was unbearable. Cameras zoomed in on her trembling hands. Just then, something unexpected happened. Keanu stood up. The audience froze. Even the host paused mid-sentence. Keanu walked across the stage quietly, calmly, and approached Clara's station. He bent down slightly and whispered something in her ear. She didn't move at first, but after a second, she gave the smallest nod. Her hands stopped shaking. Then Keanu did something no one expected. He rolled up his sleeves. "Mind if I help?" he asked Clara, loud enough for the audience to hear. She blinked, shocked. You know how to cook paella?" Keanu smiled gently. "I was taught by a woman who would have called Bruno's dish an insult to garlic." The audience burst into laughter and applause. Bruno's face turned red. "This is not a joke, Mr. Reeves," he snapped. "This is a professional competition." Keanu didn't even look at him. "So let's treat it with respect then," he replied softly, his voice steady. "Respect for every grandmother who cooked with love instead of ego." Those words hit hard. The camera zoomed in on Clara's face. She smiled through her tears. Together, Keanu and Clara worked in silence. He didn't take over. He didn't try to be the hero. He just supported her, cutting vegetables, adjusting heat, adding broth when she nodded. He moved like someone who had been in a kitchen before, not to impress, but to honor. Bruno, meanwhile, started to fumble. His anger distracted him. His sauce burned slightly. He yelled at his assistant. His knife slipped and nicked his thumb. Frustration clouded his movements. As the final bell rang to signal the end of the cooking round. The tension in the studio was thick. 2 dishes were placed in front of the judges. One by Bruno, elegant, structured, flashy. The other, a humble but beautiful paella by Clara, with Keanu standing quietly behind her, arms crossed and eyes calm. The judges tasted both. They whispered, nodded, took more bites. Then the lead judge stood. "We have made our decision," he said, and it was unanimous. A long pause. "The winner is Clara from Spain." The audience erupted. Clara covered her face, overwhelmed. Bruno stormed off without a word. Keanu didn't raise his hands or celebrate. Instead, he placed a hand gently on Clara's shoulder and whispered again, "Your grandmother would be proud." And that's when the cameras caught something real. Not the applause, not the confetti, but the tears streaming down Clara's cheeks as she whispered back, "Thank you for standing up." But Keanu just smiled. He wasn't standing up for her. He was standing up for every person who had ever been mocked for being kind, humble, or traditional. Every grandmother, every culture, every quiet soul who chose respect over pride. And in doing so, he didn't just win the room. He reminded the world that kindness is never outdated. When the applause, the confetti had barely touched the ground before the tension backstage thickened. Clara was being rushed by cameras, interviewers, and producers who suddenly wanted to know everything about her. She tried to smile, but her eyes kept searching the crowd. Finally, she spotted him, Keanu, quietly slipping away toward the exit. Trying not to draw attention, she hurried after him. "Wait," she called out, still holding the trophy in one hand, her voice trembling with emotion. "Please, just 1 minute." Keanu stopped and turned around, that gentle, understanding look still on his face. "I didn't get to say thank you," she said. "Not properly." Keanu gave a soft shrug. "You already did when you didn't give up." Clara shook her head. "No, you did something huge for me today. I don't know how to repay that." Keanu hesitated for a moment. Then he said, "Just promise me one thing. Never cook with fear again. Cook with heart, like you always have. That's the only kind of cooking the world really needs." Clara nodded slowly. It wasn't just about the food anymore. It was about identity, about honor, about not letting people strip dignity from others just because they speak softer or smile more. As Keanu turned to leave again, a sharp voice interrupted. "So this is how we reward mediocrity now?" Everyone turned. Bruno Lawrence stood with his arms folded and a smug smirk on his face. He was no longer on the stage, but his ego hadn't left the spotlight. He looked directly at Keanu. "You think you've done something noble," he said, "but all you've done is lower the bar. Let me guess, you like these home cooks because they remind you of some sob story from your past." Keanu's face didn't change. He didn't move, but something in the air shifted. Clara stepped back slightly, unsure what would happen. "I grew up with chefs," Bruno continued. "Real ones, ones who train for years, not ones who cry over saffron and seafood. You might be some Hollywood darling, but in the kitchen, you're just an actor with a spatula." The hallway fell quiet. Crew members paused. The cameraman lowered his equipment. Clara looked worried. But Keanu just stepped forward calmly, without rush, and looked Bruno directly in the eye. "You know what the difference is between a chef and a cook?" Keanu asked softly. Bruno raised an eyebrow. "Enlighten me." Keanu didn't blink. "A chef chases perfection," he said. "But a cook chases connection. A chef may win awards, but a cook wins hearts." There was silence. Bruno tried to laugh, but it came out hollow. "Do you really think food is about hearts?" Keanu took a deep breath. His voice was still calm, but there was a weight behind every word. "Years ago, when I was broke and lost, a family from Spain brought me into their home. They had nothing fancy, just love. They fed me when they barely had enough for themselves. Every meal was simple, but it made me feel seen, safe, human. That's what food is supposed to do." He looked at Clara. Then back at Bruno, you cook to be admired, they cook to be remembered. That hit harder than anyone expected. But Bruno wasn't done. So you want to turn this into a charity show, fine. Keep the medal, keep your sad stories. But don't expect respect from the real culinary world. People like me still run it. He stormed off, his coat swaying behind him like a curtain falling on a failed performance. Keanu stayed quiet for a few moments, then Clara asked, "Do people like him ever change?" Keanu smiled gently. "Sometimes, not through shouting, not through anger, but through moments. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday. He'll remember this, and if he doesn't," Keanu looked her in the eyes, "then it's still worth standing up." A few hours later, Clara sat alone in her tiny hotel room, still in shock. Her phone kept vibrating with messages, congratulations, press requests, even a few offers from restaurant groups. But something else caught her attention, a message from her grandmother back in Valencia. It was a photo. The whole village had gathered in the square to watch the competition on a projector. People had brought chairs and blankets. Kids were cheering. Old ladies wiped their eyes with handkerchiefs. And her grandmother had written just one sentence: "We didn't win because of the trophy. We won because you made us proud." Clara began to cry again. Then her phone buzzed once more. A message from an unknown number. "Thanks for not giving up today. It reminded me of someone I once knew." Keanu, she didn't know how he got her number, but she smiled. It wasn't about fame. It was about moments that stitched people together. Meanwhile, across the city, Bruno sat alone in his luxury suite. He was staring at his dish from earlier. Perfect in shape, perfect in flavor. But now, it tasted empty. He picked up a spoon, tried Clara's paella from the leftover samples the crew had kept, and he paused. Something stirred in his chest. Not jealousy. Something else. Something he hadn't tasted in years. Memory. Emotion. Sincerity. He didn't say a word. But for the first time in a long time, Bruno didn't feel like the best chef in the room, and that unsettled him more than anything. Echoes beyond the kitchen. A soft rain tapped against the windows of a small diner just outside Madrid. Inside, the TV was playing a replay of the cooking competition. People had gathered, locals mostly, watching with awe as Clara, a young woman from their own soil, stood beside a Hollywood legend and won the respect of the world. An elderly man leaned forward. "Did you hear what he said about his time here in Spain?" A waitress nodded. "They say he once lived right here, helped in a kitchen, no cameras, no attention." A girl behind the counter added, "My aunt remembers a quiet man who washed dishes and always thanked her with both hands. Said he loved the way her mother made garlic soup." The story of Keanu's quiet past in Spain was starting to spread, but not in headlines. It moved through whispers, memories, and warm stories passed over plates of bread and oil. He had never spoken of it publicly, but now the whole country was discovering a secret they were proud to carry. Back in Los Angeles, Keanu sat in a small cafe tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop. It was early morning. Most people didn't recognize him when he dressed down. That's how he liked it. The cafe owner, a Spanish man in his late 50s, placed a warm cup of café con leche in front of him and smiled. "You made us proud," the man said softly, his accent still thick. Keanu looked up. "You saw it." The man chuckled. "Every Spanish cafe in America saw it." Keanu nodded and looked down at the steam rising from his cup. "I wasn't trying to prove anything," he said. "I know," the man replied. "That's why it mattered." They shared a quiet moment. Then the cafe owner said, "Isabel would be proud." Keanu closed his eyes briefly. Isabel, the woman who had taken him in when he had no name, no future, and no hope. She didn't care that he was broke. She didn't care that he spoke poor Spanish. She only cared that he was kind. Her food had warmth in it, not just from spices, but from her soul. She had passed away years ago, but her influence never left Keanu's heart. He whispered, "I hope she saw it, wherever she is." Meanwhile, Clara's life had changed almost overnight. She had gone from a struggling cook at a local market to the face of a new culinary movement. Interviews poured in. Journalists asked her about her past, her passion, and most of all her experience with Keanu Reeves. But Clara stayed humble. "He didn't save me. she told one reporter. He reminded me that I already had what I needed, and yet not. Everything that followed was warm applause. Online, critics began to stir. Some questioned her victory. Others accused the show of using Keanu's fame to sway the results. A few even mocked her for needing help during the competition. The harsh comments stung. One night, Clara sat in her apartment reading through cruel posts. Her eyes welled up with tears. She only won because he felt sorry for her. A real chef doesn't need a celebrity sidekick. This was charity, not cooking. Her heart ached. She had tried so hard to honor her roots, to represent her grandmother's recipes. But the noise from the outside world was drowning her. Just then, her phone buzzed. A message. Don't let the world make you doubt the truth you've already lived. Keanu. She held the phone to her chest, breathed deeply, and made a decision. The next morning, she posted a video. She was in her kitchen. No makeup, no sponsors, just her and a camera. I want to talk about something real, she said softly. When I stood on that stage, I was terrified. I let someone's words make me feel small, but someone reminded me kindness is not weakness, and asking for help is not failure. So I'm not going to hide from that moment. I'm going to celebrate it. The video went viral. Not because it was flashy, but because it was honest. And honesty, it seemed, was more powerful than perfection. Somewhere in Paris, Bruno Laurent watched that video in silence. He had refused all interviews since the competition, stayed quiet, kept out of sight, but he couldn't stop thinking about that paella, about the way Clara had smiled when the audience clapped, about Keanu's words, they cooked to be remembered. He opened an old drawer in his kitchen, pulled out a yellowed notebook. Inside were his grandmother's recipes, handwritten in French cursive, stained with time and oil. He hadn't looked at them in years. He had been too busy chasing stars and reviews, too busy proving himself. But now, he turned the pages slowly. Memories rushed back. Her laughter, her lavender apron, the smell of onion and thyme. He touched the page that read soup de memoire, soup of memory. The same dish she used to make when he was sad. Bruno sat at the counter, no cameras, no judges. And for the first time in a long while, he cooked for someone he loved, across oceans. Stories were unfolding not on screens, but in kitchens. In Spain, children asked their abuelas to teach them old family recipes. In America, people Googled how to make paella with love. In France, one chef reopened his grandmother's cookbook. And in every one of those moments, something had changed, because of a quiet man in black who stood beside a trembling girl and reminded the world that food, like life, isn't about perfection. It's about people. The challenge returns. Weeks had passed since the cooking show aired, but its echoes refused to fade. What had begun as a competition turned into something far more powerful, a moment that connected people across borders, generations, and beliefs. Clara's video was still being shared, and Keanu's quiet strength was being praised, not for celebrity, but for character. But the story wasn't over. One rainy evening in Madrid, Clara received an email. It was from the producers of the cooking show. Due to overwhelming response, we are launching a special rematch event. Chefs from around the world will return for a final cook-off. We would like you to represent Spain once again. She stared at the screen. Her heart beat faster. There was more. Bruno Laurent has agreed to return, and he has requested that Keanu Reeves not be present. She sat back in her chair, stunned. The producers had added one final note. Your participation is optional, but know that the world is watching. Clara wasn't afraid of cooking, but she was afraid of being twisted into a symbol again. She didn't want it to be used. She didn't want her story to be entertainment. She wanted it to be real. So she picked up her phone and messaged the only person who could help her find clarity. Keanu, they've asked me to cook again, but they don't want you there. His reply came just minutes later. Then it's your kitchen now. You don't need me to stand beside you anymore. I'll be watching, just not from the stage. Clara read the words slowly, then smiled. He was right. This time, she would stand alone. Across the sea, in a quiet corner of Paris, Bruno Laurent stood in front of a mirror. His white chef's jacket was crisp, his name embroidered perfectly on the chest. He had the medals, The honors, the titles, but for the first time, they didn't feel heavy with pride. They felt heavy with pressure. Since the last competition, something had shifted inside him. He had started cooking differently, less for applause, more for memory. He had even reopened an old family bistro, one that had been shut for years. People noticed. Reviews spoke of depth, warmth, and surprising humility. But in private, Bruno still struggled with what had happened. How he had been exposed not by loud criticism, but by quiet dignity, and by Keanu Reeves, a man who hadn't raised his voice once. When the producers contacted him for the rematch, Bruno hesitated, but he said yes, because something inside him needed closure. What he didn't expect was that the producers would give him a choice. Mr. Laurent, we'd like you to speak before the rematch, share your thoughts, clear the air. At first, he scoffed, but later that night, alone in his apartment, he thought deeply. What if this was the moment? Not to reclaim pride, but to make peace. The new set was larger than before, brighter, louder. Banners from different countries waved behind the contestants. Fans wore flags. Social media buzzed with excitement. But Clara didn't feel nervous. She walked onto the stage in a plain white apron, her grandmother's brooch pinned to the strap. She carried no ego, no entourage, no rehearsed lines, just her ingredients and her heart. When the host asked if she was nervous, she smiled gently and replied, "I'm not here to win. I'm here to cook with love." If that's not enough, then the world still has a lot to learn. The audience applauded. Bruno arrived moments later. He looked around slowly. No one booed, but no one cheered either. People were watching, waiting, unsure which version of him would appear today. He stepped to the microphone before the contest began. His voice was low, but steady. "Last time, I lost something," he said. "Not just a title. I lost the respect of people and of myself. I said things I shouldn't have. I dismissed a culture that has as much soul as any French kitchen. I let pride speak louder than decency." He looked toward Clara. "And I let my fear of being forgotten make me forget how to be kind." The room was silent. Then Bruno added, "Today, I'm not here to defeat anyone. I'm here to cook something my grandmother taught me. Something simple, something honest." He bowed his head slightly, and for the first time since the competition began, Clara smiled at him. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet, but it was a start. The final round began. Clara reached for her ingredients: rabbit, rice, olive oil, rosemary, and saffron. She would make a dish from her childhood village, paella di montaka, a version her family cooked on cold evenings by firelight. Across the kitchen, Bruno worked with mushrooms, leeks, and cream, creating a humble soup called soup de mémoire. Both chefs moved differently than before. No shouts, no drama, just rhythm, just love. When the bell rang, the audience leaned forward. The judges tasted both dishes carefully. One judge wiped his eyes after tasting Bruno's soup. Another took 3 bites of Clara's paella without saying a word. And then the announcement came. "The winner is Spain, Clara." Cheers burst through the hall. Clara gasped. But then something remarkable happened. Before she could step forward, Bruno walked to her, and with no words, he lifted her hand and raised it high. The audience rose to their feet, not because she won, but because humility did. Backstage, away from the noise, Clara sat alone for a moment, breathing, absorbing. A stage assistant walked over, handed her a small envelope. "Someone left this for you," he said. Inside, there was only a card. In quiet handwriting. "You didn't just win, you taught. Keep cooking with heart." And in the envelope, a single photograph. It showed Keanu, years ago, in a small Spanish kitchen, wearing an apron, laughing beside an old woman. Isabel. Clara smiled through tears. The story was still being written. But its ingredients, respect, kindness, humility, would always stay the same. The flavor of memorized sun was setting behind the hills of Valencia. When Clara returned home for the first time since the rematch, the streets looked the same: narrow cobblestone lanes, old wooden doors, the scent of oranges in the air. But something inside her had changed. People stepped out of their homes as she passed. An old man clapped slowly, his eyes full of pride. A group of children waved tiny Spanish flags. Someone had painted a small mural of her with the words, "Cook with love, win with heart." She tried not to cry, but when she reached her grandmother's front door, the moment overwhelmed her. The door creaked open before she could knock. Her grandmother, frail but radiant, stood there smiling. She didn't say anything. She simply pulled Clara into a tight hug and whispered, "You didn't just cook, Niga, you healed." Inside the house, nothing had changed. The same pots hung above the stove. The same lace curtains framed the windows. Clara stepped into the kitchen and took a deep breath. "I've brought something," she said. She reached into her bag and pulled out the trophy from the rematch. But her grandmother shook her head. "This," she said, pointing to Clara's hands, "is your real prize." They spent the evening cooking together. No cameras, no deadlines, no audience. Just slow conversation, laughter, and old recipes. Clara asked her grandmother about the dishes she had never written down. They were never meant to be written. She said with a wink, "They live in your hands now." Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, Keanu sat alone in his modest apartment. He was watching Clara's acceptance speech again, this time not on a phone, but on a small TV. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, expression soft. In the video, Clara had said something that stayed with him. "We don't cook to impress," she told the audience. "We cook to remember, and to help others remember too." Keanu paused the screen. The image froze on her smiling face. He stood and walked to a dusty box on a shelf. Inside were old photographs, journals, and a few letters from people he had met over the years. At the very bottom was a wrinkled recipe card, tortilla española, from Isabel. Stared at it for a long time. Then he took a deep breath and called a number he hadn't dialed in years. The next morning, Clara's phone rang. The number was unknown. "Hello?" She answered. "Clara," a woman's voice replied. "I'm Maria. I work with a foundation Keanu Reeves helped create years ago. It supports community kitchens around the world. He said you might want to visit the one in Los Angeles." Clara blinked. Surprised, "He said that?" "Yes," Maria said. "And he asked if you'd be interested in running something new. Not a restaurant. Something better." A week later, Clara stood in front of a small, worn-down building in a quiet neighborhood in La. It had once been a soup kitchen but had fallen into disrepair. Maria stood beside her, holding blueprints. "Keanu wants this place to be a community table," she explained. "A space where anyone can come cook. Any culture, any background. No egos, just shared stories and shared meals." Clara stepped inside. The air smelled like old spices and forgotten dreams, but she saw it. The potential. The warmth waiting to be rebuilt. On the wall near the kitchen sink, she noticed an old framed photo. Young Keanu standing beside Isabel, wearing a stained apron and laughing. Her heart filled. "I'll do it," she whispered. Weeks turned into months. With help from local volunteers, donations, and Keanu's quiet support, the building transformed. They painted walls in soft yellows and warm reds, built long wooden tables, brought in second-hand pots and pans, wrote messages on the walls in different languages: "Welcome home, share." On opening day, there was no press, no reporters, just people from the neighborhood, each bringing something: bread, rice, spices, vegetables. And Keanu, he showed up early. Not with speeches or cameras, but with onions and a cutting board. He stood beside Clara in the kitchen, chopping quietly. After a while, she looked at him and said, "This feels like that first day." He nodded. "Except now, you're the one teaching." She smiled. "What about you?" Keanu paused, then said, "I'm just here to make sure the garlic doesn't burn." They both laughed. Later, when everyone sat down to eat, a boy stood and asked Clara, "Why did you come all the way from Spain for this?" She thought for a second. Then replied, "Because someone once stood beside me when I was scared. Now, I get to do the same." Double quotes. Far across the ocean, Bruno Laurent was making quiet changes of his own. His new restaurant didn't serve 10-course menus anymore. Instead, it offered meals inspired by memories. The walls were decorated with stories, handwritten notes from guests about the food that reminded them of home. One day, a package arrived for him. Inside was a simple clay dish. No Note. Just a tag that read, "From Clara." This held the first paella I ever made with heart. Bruno held it carefully and placed it in the center of his restaurant, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. And so, a dish born from kindness, an actor shaped by gratitude, a young woman guided by her roots, and a chef humbled by truth, had together stirred something bigger than any competition could measure. Something that fed more than hunger. It fed humanity. The last tabli, a soft breeze moved through the open windows of the new community kitchen in Los Angeles. The scent of simmering broth, toasted bread, and garlic filled the air. Laughter echoed. Kids ran between tables and elders stirred pots while sharing old memories. It wasn't just a kitchen anymore, it was a family, a haven, a home. And Clara, she stood at the heart of it all. Not as a guest, not as a winner, but as someone who belonged. She had learned something that couldn't be taught in culinary school or earned in front of cameras. That true leadership wasn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It was about making space for others to speak, to grow, to be heard. Keanu walked in just before lunch began, carrying 2 fresh loaves of bread under his arm. Clara looked up. "You're late," she teased. He grinned. "I got held up slicing onions at a shelter nearby. They needed help." She nodded with pride. "That's the Keanu I know." They didn't speak much after that. They didn't need to. The kitchen was alive, and in its rhythm, they both found peace. As the meal began, Clara walked over to a quiet table where a nervous teenage boy sat, fidgeting with his spoon. His clothes were worn, and his shoes had holes. She knelt beside him and said gently, "What's your favorite food?" He looked up, startled. "I don't know. No one ever asked me that before." Clara smiled. "Then let's find out together." She walked him to the counter and showed him how to stir a simple pot of lentils. His hands shook at first, but her voice calmed him. "You don't have to be perfect," she whispered. "You just have to care." Keanu watched from the corner. The scene reminded him of himself long ago, when he was the quiet one, the unsure one, the one someone else had believed in. Days passed, then weeks, and soon it had been nearly a year since that first competition. The show's producers reached out again, not with another challenge, but with a proposal. "We want to do a documentary, not about winning, but about what happened after, how food changed lives, how kindness changed people." Clara said yes, but only under one condition. "I want every country, every voice, every dish to be seen, not just mine." The producers agreed, and so the filming began, not in studios, but in kitchens, markets, shelters, farms. It wasn't about drama this time. It was about dignity. They filmed Keanu planting herbs with children behind the kitchen. They filmed Bruno cooking soup for homeless families in Paris, wiping tears as he served. They filmed Clara teaching refugees how to turn their traditional meals into local businesses. And when the documentary aired, something unexpected happened. People stopped arguing about authenticity and started sharing recipes. Food blogs were replaced with food letters, handwritten, heartfelt. Children began asking their grandparents to show them that one recipe you made when I was sick. And community kitchens popped up across different cities, each one with a long table, open hands, and a sign that read, "Cook with love, serve with heart." On the anniversary of the rematch, Clara, Keanu, and Bruno met again, this time not on a stage, but under an old tree beside a vineyard in Spain. A wooden table stood between them, covered in plates, olives, and homemade wine. Bruno raised his glass. "To the moment we stopped trying to outcook each other." Clara raised hers next and started feeding something bigger. Then Keanu, smiling softly, added, "To Isabel, to every grandmother, cook, and quiet soul who taught us that food is love." They toasted, and for a moment, all three sat in silence, soaking in the warm breeze, the laughter in the distance, and the richness of a journey none of them had planned, but all were thankful for. As the sun dipped below the hills, a little girl with curious eyes approached their table. "Are you the man from the TV?" she asked Keanu. He chuckled. "I guess so. My mama says you helped fix hearts." He looked at her gently. "I didn't fix them. I just reminded people that they could be." She reached into her pocket and handed him a folded paper. It was a drawing of a big table with lots of people, and in the middle was a bowl of soup with a smiling face. "That's your soup," she said proudly. Keanu blinked, touched beyond words. "Can I hang this in the kitchen?" he asked. She nodded. And just like that, the story continued, not in headlines or competitions, but in kitchens, in classrooms, in quiet acts of care. In the end, it wasn't about destroying an arrogant chef. It wasn't about proving who was better. It was about something deeper, something that can't be measured or judged. It was about the courage to stand up. The strength to stay kind, and the wisdom to know that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is share your table.